that we have such a large family here with us today. Some families have rich histories that they love to share. We actually have lots of big families in this church. And when you share those rich histories, each name might summon a story, and each story summons a dozen more. The pastor from my home church in Tennessee, where I grew up, had one of those families. They have a long history of living in Virginia since before the Revolutionary War. They still live in a farmhouse whose first room was built in the 1700s. One time when Eric and I were visiting their family in Virginia, we accidentally stumbled upon the grave of a distant cousin who had fought in the Civil War. My pastor David still had this young boy's sword and his diary and even a photograph in the original obituary that appeared at the time of his death in 1865. But David never knew where his distant cousin was buried. But there we were in a random churchyard in rural Virginia, and here was his name engraved into a tombstone. We returned to David's house from the cemetery and pored over the relics that were still in David's possession and thought about the meaning that they had to his family. Now, my own family does not know very much about our history. My dad's biological father disappeared when my dad was just 2 years old, never to be heard from again. One of my grandmothers was raised by her uncle, would not even speak of her biological father. My other grandfather was a first-generation American born in Ohio to Hungarian parents, but I never heard any stories about the old country. I only knew that when my grandfather got especially angry, he would yell in Hungarian. He never did that to me. As adults, both of my parents lived a long way from their own parents and their siblings. Family reunions were very rare occasions. It was really only after the death of my Opa Guy that I had gotten to know some of my aunts and uncles and cousins on my dad's side of the family. By the time I got interested in my roots, there were not very many people left who could recount the names or the stories of my ancestors. So I turned to the internet to try and find immigration records for my maternal great-grandparents. With that information, I was lucky enough to be able to find and visit the village in rural Hungary where they came from. But by the 21st century, when Eric and I showed up in this little town, there was no one left who remembered my ancestors. The only trace of them was in a yellowing church record book. The rest of their story can only be told in my imagination. To chart the family tree is to revisit the past, to examine who we are and where we have come from. Genealogies are the skeletons upon which the flesh of our history comes to life. Without these skeletons, it's hard to connect our present lives with the past. And instead of seeing ourselves as part of a living, organic, historical community, we can fall into shards of isolation, a bunch of single blips that flash briefly on the cosmic radar and then disappear altogether. What's past is prologue, Shakespeare wrote in The Tempest. The history of our parents, our families, our communities, our nations even, provides the background for the stories that we make of our lives. It's true for each one of us. It's also true for Jesus Christ. That's why in the opening verses of Matthew, the evangelist gives us a sketch, a genealogy, the skeleton of Christ's family history. We often skip it. We think it's just a boring list of names. But here, Matthew chapter 1, an account of the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, and Judah the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar, and Perez the father of Hezron, and Hezron the father of Aram, and Aram the father of Amminadab, and Amminadab the father of Nachshon, and Nachshon the father of Salmon, and Salmon the father of Boaz by Ruth, Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of King David. And David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah. And Solomon the father of Rehoboam, and Rehoboam the father of Abijah, and Abijah the father of Asaph. And Asaph the father of Jehoshaphat, and Jehoshaphat the father of Joram, and Joram the father of Uzziah. We've already gone way farther than I could ever trace my family. Uzziah the father of Jotham, and Jotham the father of Ahaz, and Ahaz the father of Hezekiah, and Hezekiah the father of Manasseh, and Manasseh the father of Amos, Amos the father of Josiah, and Josiah the father of Jeconiah and his brothers at the time of the deportation to Babylon. And after the deportation to Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Salatiel, and Salatiel the father of Zerubbabel, and Zerubbabel the father of Abiud, and Abiud the father of Eliakim, and Eliakim the father of Azor, and Azor the father of Zadok, and Zadok the father of Achim, and Achim the father of Eliud, and Eliud the father of Eleazar, and Eleazar the father of Matan, Matan the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who is called the Messiah. The genealogy of Jesus. The skeleton of his family history. Yes, it's a long list of names, one that can be easy to get lost in, but I think it's an interesting list. It's sort of a skeletal form of history, outlining so many peoples and events and stories that shape Jesus' story. There's Abraham, who had the courage to leave his home and go wherever God would send him. And there are lots of faithful kings in that history, not the least of which is King David, the first and the greatest of Israel's kings. But it's also a history with a few skeletons in the closet. Remember Jacob, the schemer and conniver who cheated everyone, including his family? He blackmailed his brother, deceived his father, and swindled his uncle Laban. It's impossible to read about Jacob without thinking, why he's not in my family. Or maybe you know who the Jacobs are in your family. And what about Judah and Tamar? Now there's a sordid story that we don't tell too often in church. Tamar was married to Judah's son, who died. And it was customary at that time for a brother to marry the wife if a man passed away, for his brother to marry the wife, the widow, so that the widow could have offspring still. However, Judah's son did not want to fulfill that duty. God struck him dead. And there was another son who could also fulfill the duty, but instead Judah just brushed Tamar aside, sent her off as a widow to go live with her own father. She did this, but some years later Judah was visiting her town. So Tamar went out dressed as a prostitute. Judah took the bait, went to bed with her, and he gave her his seal and his staff. 3 months later, Judah heard a rumor that his widowed daughter-in-law was pregnant, and he was enraged, and he ordered to have her killed. But Tamar showed up with Judah's staff and his seal that she had taken from him. And she said, "No, you're the father of my baby." Judah recognized his belongings, and in shame, he withdrew his demand for the death penalty. That's quite a family story. Judah and Tamar, though, are far from the only questionable people in Jesus' lineage. Remember King David and Uriah's wife? Matthew doesn't name her. We know she's Bathsheba. Scripture says that David's heart was devoted to the Lord, committed adultery with Bathsheba, and when he couldn't cover his tracks any other way, he murdered Uriah by sending him to the front lines of battle. And then there's Rahab from Jericho. She hid Jewish spies, helped Israel, but she was also a career prostitute. She is part of Jesus' family tree. And Rahab, along with Ruth, both are Gentile women, not Jewish, but both find their way into Jesus' genealogy. And then there's Azor. He's never mentioned anywhere else in the Old Testament. Basically forgotten, except that his name too is recorded as part of Jesus' family tree. God used all of these people. Jacob, who also wrestled with the angel and was renamed Israel. Tamar is remembered for that keen sense of justice that made sure she would not be forgotten and that the family line would continue all the way down to Jesus. Not one of Israel's kings was perfect, not even King David, but God still used Israel to bring good news to the whole world. Isn't that what Matthew is trying to tell us with this list of 40 generations? All of these people, with their good deeds and their bad deeds, the wise ones and the unwise ones, sinners and saints, kings and forgotten ones, all of these are the people from whom Christ springs. And yet he doesn't. At least not directly. Matthew makes this clear when he gets to the end of Jesus' genealogy. After that long list of so-and-so being the father of so-and-so, and so-and-so is the father of so-and-so, and on it goes, Matthew breaks the pattern at the very end. Did you catch it? Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who is called the Messiah. Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus is born, who is called the Messiah. Matthew does not call Joseph the father of Jesus in the same way Abraham was the father of Isaac. Jesus is a descendant of David, but he's a descendant by adoption. But even the adoption is turned around. The family, stretching from Abraham to Joseph, a family full of successes and failures, sinners and unknowns, this family did not choose to adopt Jesus the way parents today might choose to adopt a child. Rather, Jesus adopted this family, accepting its tainted history as his own history. This family tree that's full of branches which might better have been pruned than allowed to grow, this tree is the tree that Christ chose as his family tree. And this tree of Christ's adopted past reveals, even in his birth, a Christ who comes to seek and to save successes and failures, sinners and outsiders, all kinds of people. My own family may not know much about our history. I certainly can't trace it back 40 generations. It doesn't mean it's not important, or we shouldn't try to learn more. Family trees, even with their darker branches, our darker secrets, our family trees are stuff from which our identities emerge. None of us came into this world as a blank slate. My predecessors formed a community of which I am now part. My family tree, like Christ's, is full of successes and failures, of sinners and unknowns. There was an absentee father, a distant aunt who may have been mentally ill and was ostracized from the family. There was also a stepfather who loved his stepsons as his own blood. And there are many more whose stories I simply do not know. And yet this tree that I share with my family is in its own way a sort of community of faith, a gathering of people stamped with the image of God. Yes, the image is tarnished, but it is being made new. And that is possible because the family tree that I am a part of has been adopted by Christ, grafted into his own tree, made holy. And thankfully, it's not our successes and failures that determine our importance in the family of God. It's simply God's own grace. It is God's sovereign plans that redeem us and make us useful. You can be certain that your family tree, with all of its successes and failures and mysteries and secrets, its joys and hurts, its loves, it is adopted by Christ. It is being made new. Likewise, we here at Eliot Church are also a sort of family tree, gathered together, imperfect, but adopted into Christ's family nonetheless. It's not our biology that unites us. We are a family because we are part of the adopted people of God, something that's celebrated especially in the sacrament of baptism. And to record and to talk about the family tree is to record the story of God's covenantal faithfulness, God's covenantal grace to God's people. And that is the very grace and faithfulness of God that we celebrate at Christmas, that we celebrate in the birth of Christ, who comes as part of this very human family and calls us to belong to him now and forever. May it be so. Amen.